Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Signcast. I'm Madeline, the host and Signups content and community manager. Today, I'm talking with Maddy Osman about how to write great content for readers and for ranking, especially as we have these new algorithm updates from Google. Maddy, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into the content marketing SEO space?
Absolutely. And just have to say, I love two Madelines. That's my full name as well.
A little bit of Madeline supremacy here. So,
Just a slight amount. Yeah, so whenever somebody asks me that, for me, it always starts back in college. I had a job at like our student life marketing and design department. And that's when I decided I wanted to do marketing in general.
Mhm.
Because I was a business major and I didn't know what side I was interested in. And so that kind of like helped me figure that out. But interestingly enough, at that job, I was a website designer and basically got the opportunity to contribute to like our student life blog and like our social media channels. And I think it
Right.
was that I discovered, that's I think I'm more interested in creating the content that goes on the design than the design that holds the content.
Mhm.
So yeah, so from there, and really even in doing that job, I took on my first freelance gig, and that kind of set me up for success. Then after I graduated, I had a couple full-time jobs. They were in sales. I was always kind of hoping that that would lead to a marketing job at those companies. And then
Mhm.
with really like my second full-time job, they were working on a role for me, but it just wasn't happening in my ideal time period. And so I leaned into what I was doing freelancing. I was still doing some website design, but a lot more blog content and social media content. And so I quit my job. I really leaned into that. I had enough work to make that leap to freelancing full time and just kind of built it up from there. And then after doing that for a while, I discovered content is really my true love. And I went from being like Maddy Osmond freelance writer to building an agency around my writing process that really just focuses on the writing and not
Mhm.
social and not website design, but just content writing and strategy.
Right. Right. So you fell in love with writing and everything else came together as
Exactly.
it goes. I'm kind of the same way. I really like creating content. I love the process. I love writing and yeah, excited to be learning more with you because you're clearly an expert both in content marketing and digital marketing, which intersect more than some people would think. Yeah.
Somewhat synonymous, somewhat.
I'd love to hear your take on. I know Google has been changing its algorithms. I know people have been being stressed about their rankings changing. Yeah, I'd love to hear like any impact you've seen, how it's been changing how you do things or maybe not changing how you do things.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that one thing that Google has always been very straightforward with us about as SEOs, even though they don't tell us everything about their algorithm, they keep a lot of that kind of close to the chest. But one thing that they've always said is like content is king, as
Mhm.
trite as that sounds, that has always been like their axiom. And every time they describe what once they give us information about an algorithm update, when they do choose to share details, it kind of always comes back to that idea, the idea that what they want to show in search is something that helps the searcher, something that
Right.
is high quality, something that they're willing to send somebody off to explore. And so I don't think that anything has really fundamentally changed, at least in terms of what the goal was. The
Mhm.
execution certainly has changed a lot in recent years. And
Definitely.
so, yeah, I mean, I would say that like there's been a major leap in 5, 10 years ago where it was like actually using meta tags and defining keywords and synonyms and literally putting that into like the HTML of your article instead
Mhm.
of weaving keywords in naturally and expecting Google to pick up on those. And so I think that a lot has changed from those days and sort of like the days where what we would now describe as like black hat SEO actually did work. And that's really what the algorithm was designed around, but it's kind of a crutch for Google, right? Because it's
Mhm.
like we haven't figured out how to sort of figure out something that's qualitative and turn it into something that an algorithm could measure quantitatively.
Mhm.
I would say that something that did change majorly, again, not the purpose, but the execution of Google's algorithm was when like the BERT algorithm update happened,
Right.
which I think that was back in 2019. And so I'm sure most people who listen to this podcast would know what that was, but just to quickly define it, it was basically the ability for Google to read a sentence the way it always did, from left to right or whatever, but then
Mhm.
also to read it backwards and to understand every word in that sentence in relation to the word that comes before, after, or anywhere in that query, basically. So
Mhm.
that changed things majorly in terms of the execution because now Google can really understand the context of why you're using certain phrases in your search versus that old exact match ideology.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, I think it's interesting too because Bert is very much it's like a child of them playing around with more AI, machine learning. That's always been a part of their algorithm, but like it's really a part of that update. But
Mhm.
what's interesting is like while they are trying to make effective use of these machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies, is now I think a lot of the recent updates, like there was the spam update, and then the unhelpful content update is
Mhm.
really an effort to sort of fight against how we're using AI in a way.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like Google's definitely using AI in a way where it's like they actually want to understand how are users actually searching for things and can we make an AI that understands content the way that our users do? Whereas if you're a business kind of trying to hack the system, I'll say, or like get ranked, get noticed, it's
Perhaps.
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of it can be definitely impactful as to how you approach things, how you kind of figure out how do I implement SEO and keywords into my content. So, yeah, how has Google's updates kind of changed how you approach content?
It hasn't fundamentally changed how we approach content. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of it comes down to like when they told us about the helpful content update and they gave us their, like webmaster guidelines, different questions that we could ask ourselves about our content. It's like in answering those questions, a lot of that, at least in my business, we've already sort of answered in terms of like our own style guide, like our approach to writing and making it a great reader experience because that's ultimately what it is about for us. We create content with an SEO purpose, but it's really not enough for any content creator to create something that ranks but
Right.
then doesn't really convert, right? Or that doesn't support sort of like the sales journey or even like the post purchase process. People have
Mhm.
questions about how to use a certain product, and having like a really solid piece of content might cut down on the time that people get in touch with their customer service team and like having to handle it with a human versus like this already exists. And one good example of that is I work with a client called WordFence, and they realized that they were answering the same customer service queries again and again, and text wasn't really doing it because they have a WordPress plugin, and a million things can go wrong with WordPress, just
Of
interaction,
course.
different, themes so it's like you really need to have something that somebody could follow along with. And so this is not so much about SEO, but it's more about like anticipating, the reader experience or the customer experience. And so I worked with them to create a bunch of videos that are just like, how do you set up two-factor authentication? Or
Right.
how do you use this very specific feature for understanding like what countries are accessing your website, other security related things? And so there are different ways to do it for sure, whether it's a blog article or a video and stuff like that. But just the idea that you're creating something, you're like anticipating a need. And that should be what creating content is about,
Mhm.
is solving for those needs that you anticipate versus pulling an idea out of nowhere and saying, well, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't just be creating stuff for a ghost audience, so to speak.
Or an audience of, the bots that are going to scan it to see if it should show up in the index, but have no tie to what actually happens after that. And I think like another thing that's interesting to think about when we talk about like AI generated content, like sort of like the spammy content as the Google quality rater guidelines would define it as,
Mhm.
is just the idea that like a robot doesn't have empathy. They don't really care if you buy it or not, right? Doesn't affect if they have a job or not, or maybe it gives them a break if they're not doing a good job, but
Mhm.
they don't they don't really understand what it is to be a human and to be plagued by whatever problems send us to search.
Right.
So it's like a fundamental piece that's missing from any AI generated content.
Right, right. And I've definitely seen as the tools kind of get more advanced and yeah, they write stuff that can be kind of construed as human. I've been very
Right.
interested to see people kind of testing them out and seeing, oh, can Google recognize is
Right.
this AI generated content? And for the most part, Google usually does recognize when it's content is written by not a human. But yeah, for now, I've seen a lot of content marketers getting great like use out of AI software just to write like first drafts, just to kind of get things started. But yeah, it's always kind of comforting to know that robots don't quite know.
Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, yeah. Have you tested out any of the AI tools?
We've played around with a couple. Like I always look at like AppSumo, which for those who don't know is like a marketplace for entrepreneurs, sort of like lifetime software deals. And so
Hmm.
the idea is that, you kind of like invest early. It's a small one-time cost. And then some of them are going to work out, some of them aren't. But there's a ton of AI copywriting tools that go through this marketplace, and many that are like among the top now, like maybe they weren't when they were first there. But
Hmm.
yeah, we've definitely played around with them. And I agree. I think that the main use case for us would be not starting with a blank page. It helps sort of like kickstart ideas. Or
Right.
another one that I really like is called, I always forget, it's not Right Sonic, but it's something like that. But it's basically, or maybe it is, but it's basically like a Google Docs add on. And what happens is you basically, write your sentences, whatever, and you're kind of going in and editing yourself. And what it can do is take what you've already said and you're
Hmm.
like, something about that feels off. I want to edit it, but my mind's blanking on what the edit is. And so you can just highlight the text and it gives you like several suggestions for how you could rearrange it.
Oh, I think I've seen that one.
Yeah, it might be
Definitely.
Right Sonic. It's something like that. But I think that's such a cool use of AI because it's
Mhm.
like it's based on what I already came up with. It's just sort of solving for my human ineptitude of not figuring out where I want it to go?
Exactly. Yeah. So when you're writing content, like where do you start? What's your process?
Sure. Yeah, I think in terms of kind of what we're talking about with like AI and stuff, it really does start with a little bit of like topic research. And so we use tools like Phrase and ClearScope kind of at different parts of the process, but they both do very similar things, which is
Mhm.
analyzing the top SERPs for whatever primary keyword that we've determined we want to go after, and giving things like Phrase does a really good job of calling out stats that like all the top articles use. And so that's just a good place to start your research.
Mhm.
Or kind of like terms you'd expect to see in a heading. So you can start to sort of build out an outline again that follows expectations. And that's where you have to be careful because you don't want to create something that looks exactly like what's already out there. You want to add something to the void of, what's already been created so that it is like useful and helpful.
Mhm.
'Cause that's what we're talking about, helpful content. Um, but that starts with research that you would probably have done on your own anyway, analyzing what's out there, and then making sure that you're adding a unique angle, whether that's things like subject matter expert interviews and quotes, interesting visuals that really add to the text that's already out there, like infographics or statistics or something that help to visually explain a concept that's really hard to understand if it's text alone. or even just like an angle, like maybe you take the contrarian view on what everybody else is saying, right? And so yeah, so it starts actually with a little bit of like AI tool help, and then mixing in that human ingenuity. Now that I know
Mhm.
this is how I'm going to make it my own. When we work with clients, typically we do our keyword research process on our own after agreeing on a topic. Sometimes we'll do the keyword research to uncover the topic if the client really isn't sure, and then we go to the outline stage. Typically, then a client would have the opportunity to add in their own thoughts before it goes to draft, because it's a lot easier to sort of start with the skeleton before fleshing it out. And that's why outlines and briefs are great in general. They get us all on the same page.
Mhm.
So from there, we have editors review things at pretty much every stage. It goes to draft, it goes back to an editor, then it goes back to the client. A lot of sort of like the SEO tools and stuff that we're using are really in that sort of keyword research stage before doing any of the writing. And then we do use, for example, like ClearScope kind of at the
Right.
end to just make sure we hit everything that we wanted to hit, and that it's sort of meeting expectations in terms of what Google would want to see to rank that content.
Right. Right. And how do you kind of test that this is meeting Google's expectations? Like, what's the process there?
Sure. I mean, some of it is doing rank tracking, Google Analytics tracking, and just and checking over time. And one thing, I can't remember exactly where I learned this tip, but something that's really interesting is, making sure you have Google Search Console installed on your site and that's working and all that. But going in maybe, a month or a couple weeks after something's been publishing and seeing like what keywords is it ranking for that I
Mhm.
didn't, that I wasn't optimizing for specifically. And then if that text doesn't actually show up in your article, going back in and making changes so that it has a better chance of ranking for those keywords even higher. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think meeting expectations is one part measurement, but it's also one part knowing what Google's looking for, right?
Right.
And so for me, one thing that I did like a year or two ago was I did a deep dive into the quality rater guidelines, and just like going through all the examples they had, going through all sort of like the reasoning and just trying to make sense of that for our own content creation process. And that's where it became really clear to me that like the AI generated content, that spam to them, like they reiterate it several times.
Mhm.
Um, but what it comes down to, I think, for the average SEO who's trying to make sense of it without having to read almost 200 pages of examples, basically, is they sort of have two measurements of what they even want to rank in search. And I mean, it's worth mentioning too that the quality rater guidelines, it's for a human person that goes in and does sort of an audit of sorts on
Mhm.
different search results. But I really think that it's like a look into the brain of Google. Like this is how they take that qualitative, way of looking at ranking content and make it quantitative. It's by doing
Right.
this with millions of search results, over time. And anyway, so the two things that they focus on are, first of all, does a page meet the needs of the searcher? And at a high level, did it answer the question that they sought out with the terms that they used, and sort of analyzing the intent of what they were looking for specifically? So first of all, does it meet the needs of the search? And then the second biggest factor is the page quality there, which is something
Mhm.
that anybody who does like PPC stuff should be really familiar with, because page quality is also really important for, getting like the best pricing for whatever keywords that you're bidding for. They want to show something that is going to satisfy whoever clicks on that ad, for example, over somebody who sure is also paying them, right? But like isn't really something that somebody doesn't convert on, or they Google always says like, oh, we don't use Google Analytics data for rankings or whatever. I think that's a lie, but that like the bounce rate, for example, as a metric. If somebody clicks on an ad and then immediately clicks back, whether they're going to admit to it or not, I think that has a factor
Right.
on just, yeah, your stuff showing up and what you get charged. So yeah, just the idea that your content, not only that it like satisfies the search, but that it's really a good reader experience when they get to that page, and the information is organized well. It doesn't have to be like the prettiest design in the world. I don't think that's what it means at all. I think it just means that you can find what you're looking for quickly and it's easy to navigate.
Mhm. Right, right. Because I think definitely with the more recent updates, Google's been definitely making it clearer that they're kind of focused only on the user experience. Like, what do users want? What are they actually doing when they're on the site? And like making sure that they have a good experience so that they actually come back and use Google to find what they're looking for instead of, I know that there's been a few, maybe a bit clickbaity articles about, oh, like Gen Z is using TikTok instead of Google. What does it mean? But it is a good question of like whether you could find what you're actually looking for when you go to Google to search. So yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely makes sense. Like yeah, like when you kind of break it down, it does make like total logical sense that yeah, like good SEO just means good user experience, good article for people, which is good content. So yeah, definitely goes hand in hand. I am on the note of TikTok, I am wondering what you think about there's been kind of some rumors that are maybe unfounded, but maybe are truthful about how Google is going to introduce kind of more diverse forms of content, especially around maybe showing more videos, maybe indexing more social media. Um, yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good prediction because they have been experimenting with all these different SERP features. I mean, things like schema markup is something that you can do on your own and implement on your site to sort of tell Google, like, this is an article, this is a
Mhm,
video, this is a recipe, like it's something that you can kind of help to signal to Google. And then there are certain features associated with that. And then there's other experiments that they do. And I think SEO Twitter is a great place to poke around and to see what those experiments are, because people are catching them, just as soon as they come out, and speculating and wondering what it means. And I think that it is going to be interesting to see how that affects sort of like the typical organic results, just articles, the way that we've thought about them so far and how we optimize them. Um, One thing that we do at the Blacksmith is that we always look for a featured snippet opportunity.
right.
And it's not like always like a perfect fit or like an obvious thing that's going to work. It's just like when it works, let's try to go beyond, a primary or secondary or semantic keywords. It's like, let's be really purposeful about, let's say none of that works, right? We could still maybe get the featured snippet if we're thinking about that from really the point that we're outlining the content.
Mhm,
um, and then I think the other thing to consider, just in terms of like there are these different SERP features, is like how can you repurpose content, or how can you sort of build different content mediums into the same article? And so, like, one example of that for us is I started recently a YouTube channel that's just like quick 5-minute content. It's called Content Marketing Mentor. So it's just like a dive into like one very specific topic and something to think about. And so what we'll do is I'll film that. And then what we've been doing is, whenever we want to hire new writers, one of our test ideas to work with them is to give them that video and be like, make a teaser for this,
mhm,
basically. It shouldn't be exactly the same as the video, but it's kind of inspired by it. And it's trying to get people to dig in deeper. To some extent, it's trying to also drive people towards my book, and so it's just like promotional stuff based on something we've already created. So that's kind of like a content brief that we're then reusing for this blog post that didn't yet exist. And then, another way to think about it too is on our blog, and I guess I haven't done too much testing to see how many people use this, but we have a tool, it's called play.ht, that
mhm,
translates the text, like using AI, into a spoken voice. And so somebody, if they're busy, they're like a podcast person, they don't have time to like sit here and read it, but maybe they have time to listen to it on their commute or when they're at the gym or something like that, that's another way that they can consume the content. And so
right.
I'm not sure how much that factors into search, but I think it does factor into that reader experience that search is trying to build a process around analyzing and matching, people who have content that meets needs and that is a high page quality. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I think the last thing I could say about that too is just like always be thinking about like how visuals can contribute to that reader experience and something that could show up whether in Google image search or again, just like supporting the reader experience are things like maybe making like infographics or like annotated screenshots. Again, if it's like a WordPress client and I'm trying to write a how-to article that drives them to a really specific action, so it's thinking through really like the multimedia of an article, right?
Right.
And how do you do that in an effective way that isn't going to take a million resources or a million hours for every article you write, but how can they like feed into each other?
Right. Yeah, we've been kind of taking a same approach as we kind of delve into these new mediums, like obviously the podcast, but also we've been doing little videos as well, and kind of, yeah, just how can you kind of give the best experience for the user while also making like great and meaningful content that people can find and appreciate. Yeah, because obviously blogs and articles have their place and time, and there's still a bunch of people who love a good article. It's nice that you can, especially if like a well structured article, it's so nice that you can just kind of skim it and kind of get the like essence of it without having to invest a lot of time. But there are a lot of people who, yeah, they love to watch videos, or they prefer to get their news or their information while they're commuting. So they like a podcast. And yeah, like people have different styles of content that they prefer. So it's nice to see things become kind of more accessible also.
Yeah, and people learn different ways too is the other thing. Like you take yourself back to your school experience and like, the days where you got to do like a hands-on project where maybe you got to make a poster or watch a movie and take notes. It's like all different experiences versus like a straight up lecture that maybe like didn't have any notes, didn't have
Right.
any goals, and like how hard is it for some people to get that information down and truly understand it versus like when you get to interact with it in your preferred way of learning.
Mhm. Just from like, I'm curious, since you mentioned that you're kind of delving into video and all this other stuff, like what kind of traction have you been seeing with your new content forms?
Yeah, I think the YouTube channel has been growing faster than I probably anticipated, and I think, and not like in like a crazy way, right? But like we have, I think, like 120 something subscribers after starting it not that long ago. I haven't been super consistent with it either, so that's the other problem. But it's just like every day there's like a new subscriber. And so it's
Mhm.
incremental, but it is moving. And I think part of it too is like we are doing SEO around like the titles and being really thoughtful with like thumbnails and how do those bring people in and engage people, and
Mhm.
writing a good description so that I'm sort of setting expectations for what they can expect when they hit play. And I think setting expectations properly is just a good rule of thumb for anything with search and reader experience and content. It's like, what can somebody expect on the other end, you know?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think another thing with visuals is we used to work with a company called Design Pickle, where you can kind of sort of like outsource your design stuff to them and they handle all the details. And that was really great at the beginning of making my business into more of this agency model. But now we've hired some designers that are like internal to our team. So it's
Mhm.
like easier to just like work directly with them and get revisions and stuff in the same day. But it has made a major difference, I would say, when we're talking to clients about, like a new client, for example, about what we can help them with. And we'll mention almost in passing, like, by the way, we can do custom brand images for you too. And for them, typically that's like a totally different department or a person on their team who always has like a
Mhm.
million things to do. And their request is like the bottom of the pile. So it's like never gonna
Yeah.
happen. um Visuals, I think that visuals absolutely transform written content from something that could be so amazing but like hard to consume because it's just text. into something that really is engaging and keeps you moving, and again caters to different learning styles. Because I think I said it earlier, but for me, when I look at a written statistic, especially if it's comparative, like, this company did this versus this company, or this year versus that, whatever, it's really hard for me to conceptualize. I'm not a math brain, but when I can see it at like a pie chart or a bar chart or something, it's like, oh, okay, like that totally makes sense. And I don't
Right.
have to I don't have to spend that much time processing it like I would if it was just written.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, I'm the same way. There's definitely certain things that are always best consumed in one certain form. Yeah, and I think yeah, especially going back to the YouTube point, I think it's always interesting kind of going into a new platform also. It kind of because obviously YouTube has its own algorithm, Twitter has its own algorithm, any platform has its own algorithm, and it's always so interesting and enlightening to me when I delve into a new platform to kind of see, oh, these are the rules for this platform, and overall they're usually the same of like be consistent, be great, you know. But it's it's always fun to see how different things perform and how different platforms have different audiences. It's always very
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and going back to different forms of content, I know you have a book, so I'd love to hear like what prompted you to write that.
Sure. Yeah, I'll flash it since we're on video here.
I
Sometimes you have to put your hand in front of it so it shows up virtual background going on,
yeah.
but good one. So I wrote, it's called Writing for Humans and Robots: The New Rules of Content Style. And I wrote it initially because I wanted to create a resource for the writers, and I guess the editors too, on my team. So we have what's called the Blogsmith Style Guide, and it's something that both of those parties already use. And what I was thinking is like it does a good job of like defining rules, but what it could benefit from is a little bit more of like the context of like why that's a rule, and also examples such as like, this is a good example of this rule, or this is an example that like wouldn't work based on this rule, and just kind of like being able to comparatively see like right versus wrong, or just like best practice versus not so best practice. So I wrote it over the pandemic, didn't have much else to do. So
A great time, a great pandemic activity.
I was really pleased it worked out the way it did. And then yeah, I mean, I think the other way to sort of like describe this book is it's kind of like a modern day homage to the book The Elements of Style, which
Mhm.
many writers are familiar with. It's just kind of like an essential grammar guide for creating really any type of content. And
Right.
even though it was written originally in 1918, over 100 years ago now, nothing about it is necessarily out of date. It's just that it was written in a time that was so far removed from like the global digital world that a lot of us are writing about. um, a lot of things have changed, even, popular culture, politics. I mean, just the way that like we engage with each other. And so I think that was another important thing, is just the idea of like, when you're writing a piece, whether it's for a local audience or not, if it's on the internet, it's for a global audience. And so you
Mhm.
really have to think about how your words might be coming across, even if you don't intend them to come across in a bad way, that they still could, because you have to be thoughtful about language,
Right.
basically.
Right. I feel like that's definitely been a more of a discussion lately when people write content or post something silly on their personal accounts and it kind of finds the wrong audience,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know,
Right.
and it's not always taken the right way. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great resource for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think the majority of people have bad intentions, right? It's more about, I'll give an example that I give a lot, but it's a really impactful one, which is saying something like clearly or obviously. I had an editor many years ago. I don't really do the writing for the business now, but back when I did, I had an editor whose edit was something like, this person who's reading this is coming here to learn something, right? And
Right.
so it's not really fair to like put them in this box, even though maybe the average audience is like digital, like intermediate digital marketers or whatever, but maybe this topic is a little bit more beginner or whatever. Maybe somebody stumbled across it because they want to upskill and they have no idea what this is. And so to almost like put them on edge by saying a word that, even if it doesn't mean this, comes across as like, well, you should have known this, like you're dumb, or like, why wouldn't you have this knowledge? It's like, it's so unproductive that the word doesn't mean anything anyway, so just
Right.
cut it. So it's stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, I always it can be easy to just kind of when you're writing content do a little bit of a writing it as if it's for you type of
Right,
thing
right.
and like you already know all the stuff, but yeah, it's always important to think about your audience. Yeah, what's another kind of like most common edit that you see?
Another one is just adding like fluff, like unnecessary words. So like another example that I share sometime is like, it's like, simply open the app, if it's like a how to, and it's like, here's how to do this part of the step or whatever. But it would be more to the point, and maybe even less, like, I don't know if saying simply is like antagonizing or not, but it might be if like you have trouble with the action, right? You're like, well, it's not simple.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, like
it's just like, oh well, it was hard for me. Am I dumb? But just saying like, open the app, it means the same exact thing. The other thing from more of like an inclusive point of view is like, talking about, for example, like somebody who maybe like you're writing a news journalism story and you're talking about somebody who very well like maybe a criminal, but like
mhm,
in our country, we believe that you're innocent until proven guilty, so we don't like immediately say like this criminal. It's like this person who was charged with a crime or something. You're like, again, who knows, like this person might be the most guilty person, whatever, but because that's like what we believe here, and that's like the process that we follow judicially, um you have to use the right identifiers instead of sort of jumping to conclusions about what they may or may not be based on current information.
right. Right. That's a great point. Yeah. Especially since things can be taken out of context and then it would be not like everybody like, "Oh, this news platform or this person said this
Right.
person is a criminal,"
You don't
and
want
they're
that
not.
to originate you, right? Like somebody else can be the one who makes that mistake, but you don't
Yeah.
want you that. And I mean, that brings up the importance of things like fact checking, and like not taking a statistic and presenting it as fact without sort of investigating the original source and how they presented it, right? Because somebody could have written about it and they could have misinterpreted it, not on purpose, but you write based on that misinterpretation, and then it becomes this spiraled out whole different thing. And then again, if you're writing for clients or something, they went back to the original source and they're like, that is not at all what it meant, and then you just
Right.
look bad.
Yeah.
So words matter, meaning matters, intent matters.
Yeah. And then I guess a final question. Yeah, if someone's looking to get into obviously you've given a ton of great advice already, but yeah, if someone's looking into getting into writing better content, doing better SEO, like where's the first place they should start in terms of looking for resources and yeah, getting started?
Sure. I think that it's definitely a good idea. I would say read the quality rater guidelines if you have the stomach for it, or read, maybe some write-ups of that, because I think that looking sort of straight into the horse's mouth on that is really the most direct way that you can figure out what's
Mhm.
right. I think, the other thing is really to just start experimenting and playing around. That was another big thing for me when I kind of went from being Maddy Osman, freelance writer, has a full-time job. This isn't my full thing, to like, now I have a content agency. The one of the catalysts for me was that I started my own blog and I was trying to come up with different promotional methods to just, because I knew I wanted to do marketing. I didn't know what marketing exactly I wanted to do. I knew that I liked digital marketing. So I started experimenting with different things, social media, giveaways, whatever, email marketing. And that's really where I discovered SEO. It was
Mhm.
specifically for that blog and trying to promote it. Um, and that's how I discovered one of my favorite stories is the blog used to be about living in Chicago and, living like a broke post-college student. And so having fun, like being able to go out and do stuff without going broke. And so one of my favorite things to do in Chicago when I used to live there was I used to volunteer at Lollapalooza so that I could get in for free.
So fun. Yeah.
Great, especially if you get the right position. So I used to work on the water team, which you just fill up people's water bottles and they're really happy to see you. So it was a good role. So I wrote a blog post about just my experience volunteering, how I found out about it, what the expectations are of volunteers, how you get invited back to the next year's, and all that good stuff. And so I think the keyword that I was trying to optimize around, which probably wouldn't work as well now because it would have been like an inexact intent match. But this was just me being like, you know, a little shit when I was 20 or whatever I could to get traffic or whatever. But the keyword was like free Lollapalooza tickets, which like technically that is what I was talking about, right?
Yeah.
But it was really more about like you get that by like putting in some work. But anyway, it was like the top of Google for years for that term.
Oh my god. Yeah. Well, I mean, if I'd been Googling that, I would have seen it.
So that like that's just like it's one of those things that in doing that and in seeing it worked, I mean, that really for me helped me to discover a love for SEO and to understand the power of it. And I think to some extent, like also understanding that maybe I was like misusing that power a little bit with like a clickbaity, heading, and it's still important to set expectations, right? But yeah, so that was one way that
Yeah.
I think full circle, I guess.
That's funny. Yeah, maybe if my blogs I made in middle school, had done proper SEO, I would have gotten the internet fame that I thought I deserved.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, well, yeah, thank you so much for talking to me today. Yeah, I hope everybody go check out Maddie's new and improved blog that is no longer just about free Lollapalooza
But
tickets.
if you want to talk about that too, I can help you out.
Yeah, this has been the Signcast, and we'll see you all next week for another episode.